right, so Americans have until July 17th to claim old tax refunds from 2019. The IRS is saying nearly 1.5 million of you have yet to claim your refund, and that totals, get this, almost $1.5 billion. The agency has a 3-year deadline for people to claim that money, and the deadline and the federal tax filing deadline are typically on the same day. But officials have extended the deadline this year because of the COVID pandemic. Now, while some people are scrambling to claim their old refund, procrastinators, listen up. You have a Tuesday deadline to file your 2022 tax return. The IRS is warning that some filers will receive a smaller refund this year, and data shows that the average refund is $300 less than it was last year, which is a 10% decline. Now, the change is partly due to pandemic-era relief programs that are expiring. Brandon Arnold is the Executive Vice President of the National Taxpayers Union and joins us now live. Brandon, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks for having me.
All right, Brandon, so who does this impact? Should everybody be bracing themselves for a smaller refund this year? Does this apply to all Americans?
It'll apply to a lot of Americans. Millions of Americans are going to be affected by this because, as you said, the child tax credit went down in value from 2021 to 2022. We increased that during the pandemic from $2,000 up to $3,000 or $3,600 if you had younger children. That reverted back to $2,000 last year. That's going to affect millions of Americans. There are a few other provisions, including less generosity when it comes to charitable giving for tax purposes. That is also going to take a bite or maybe a nibble out of some people's tax refunds. And as well, we also have the stimulus payments. Those stimulus payments that went out in 20 and 21, those are gone. So people didn't get those in 2022. A lot of people received those in the form of direct deposit, but some Americans got those when it came to settling up their taxes on tax day. So for all of those reasons, we are going to see smaller refunds. We've already started to see smaller refunds to the tune of several $100s on average.
All right. Do you have any good news for us here? Because it seems like every year the tax code changes, right? Like you just said, the child tax credit went down, charitable giving, that went down as well. Why is the tax code always changing? And do you have any good news? Is there any good news in terms of a credit that Americans might not know a lot about?
Well, if you like getting audited, I have very good news for you because the IRS just got a huge budget increase. And that means that it's really, really important for Americans, to be serious here, really, really important for Americans to make sure that they double, triple, quadruple check their taxes before submitting them, because you don't want any red flags that may trigger not just a delay in getting your refund, but potentially an audit. So you want to make sure your taxes are completed in a very accurate fashion. And if you can, by all means, do them electronically. You're less likely to make errors, and you're more likely to have those tax returns processed in an expeditious fashion if they are done electronically. A little more than 90% of tax returns are filed electronically these days, but there's still millions that come in a paper fashion, and the IRS trudges to those in a very slow, archaic manner that you do not want to subject yourselves to if you can all avoid it.
You know, no one wants to get audited, so you raise a really, really important point there. No one wants to leave money on the table either. So what are your thoughts? Is it better to itemize your deductions, or is it better to just take the standard deduction to avoid potentially being audited?
Well, you wouldn't want to do that just to avoid being audited, because audit risks still remain relatively low, especially if you dot every I and cross every T. What you want to do is the revenue maximizing strategy here. So a lot of people, that means doing your taxes both ways and finding out which way yields a larger refund or a smaller tax liability. So it's smart to double check that work. You know, back in 2017, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, that doubled the standard deduction. So that meant that a lot of people moved into the standard deduction category. That's a much more streamlined fashion to complete your taxes. It's much quicker. It actually reduced compliance times. We saw people spending less time doing their taxes. Unfortunately, because the tax code has gotten significantly more complicated, in large part due to pandemic era policies, but also some big tax changes that took place under the last Congress and the Biden administration, we've seen tax complexity increase. People are spending more time than they used to completing their taxes, and that's really unfortunate.
No, you got that right, because I'm going to spend the entire weekend doing my taxes. I'm one of the procrastinators out there. I know that April 18th is the tax filing deadline. I'm sure there are lots of people out there in the same boat. So what happens if someone isn't able to meet the deadline? What should they be doing right now? And what if they do miss the deadline?
Well, if you miss the deadline, you could be subject to penalties. You could have to pay interest on the amount that you owe the IRS. So you don't want to be late. Now, you do want to wait to the last minute if you owe the IRS money, because you want to hold on to those dollars as long as you possibly can before sending them off to the federal government. By contrast, if you are expecting a refund, you want to get that in as soon as possible. But the most important thing here is to make sure you do your taxes accurately and properly. You do not want to trigger an audit, and you do not want to have a back and forth with the IRS if they do happen to catch something, even if it's correct. But you don't want to have that back and forth with the IRS, because that can be very, very stressful and time consuming. And that does happen. Sometimes the IRS finds red flags that are completely nothing burgers, but they, for whatever reason, trigger the IRS system, and that can create headaches. So you don't want to give the IRS any reason whatsoever to come knocking on your door.
Yeah, no nothing burgers for sure. So, Brandon, I want to ask you, because we know that we're going to see refunds decrease by about 10% or $300 a refund. Is this the norm moving forward? I mean, are we seeing this decrease because of the COVID pandemic, or should we just expect our refunds to get smaller and smaller every year?
Oh, man, you said you wanted good news. Unfortunately, I don't have it here because the standard deduction and a lot of those policies that were changed in 2017 for the 2018 tax year, those are scheduled to disappear in a few years. So we've already seen the child tax credit revert from $3,000 to $2,000. In a few years, it'll drop down to $1,000. So we could see even smaller refunds in a few years. Now, we still have a couple years to fix that. I'm hopeful that Congress will address this. It's something that I work on, my organization works on, is improving the tax code to make sure that some of these changes that are scheduled, including having the halving of the standard deduction as well as the child tax credit, do not indeed take effect, that we can extend those policies of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act so people do not have huge reductions in the size of their refunds a few years down the road.
Yeah, please do something about that. Next time we talk, I want you to have some good news for us.
I'll do my best.
Brandon Arnold from the National Taxpayers Union. Brandon, thank you so much for stopping by today. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Coming up next.